Resin casting and painting tips. In this tutorial, we're going to cover some processes for making sure you get bubble-free parts in simple relief molds, and also getting good paint adhesion to polyurethane parts, because sometimes polyurethane resins can be tricky to paint. So we're going to go over some of the common mistakes made in the casting process and show how to address those and make sure that you get really nice paintable parts out of your mold. Now, to begin with, we'll be using a silicone mold. This is a PlatSil Gel-10 silicone mold. This is just a very tough, soft rubber that's ideal for casting small resin parts. And one of the first things we're going to do is dust that with baby powder. You can use cornstarch or talc or baby powder, but the main thing is you want to put a little bit of powder in there, blow out the excess, and what you'll find is that soft silicone mold holds a thin layer of that powder right there on the surface. Now we're going to come back to the function of that powder here in just a minute, but first with mixing your resin, this is really important. This particular resin we're using is TC800, which is a fairly fast setting plain white resin. This is a good, tough, impact resistant resin that cures to about a 75D. So this is great for model parts and figurines and things like that. And TC800 is mixed 1:1 by volume or 100A to 88B by weight. So real important there. If you're working in small amounts and you want to make sure you're extra precise, switch to that weight ratio because it's very difficult to eyeball volume on that small of a scale and get everything perfect. So about the smallest batch I'll do by volume is about a 4-ounce batch like I'm doing here, 2 ounces of A and 2 ounces of B in a graduated cup. And these are very accurately marked PPG mixing cups. If you're concerned about the graduated markings, I'm going to show you another technique you can use later in the video. Now, because this relief piece has a lot of fine detail with sharp edges, little corners that tend to trap air bubbles, what I'm doing is taking my finger with a glove on, of course, and then working that resin into those little areas. Now, TC800 is a fast setting formula. This gives you about a 2-minute working time, so you got to move fast, but that's a great way to ensure that you get a bubble-free surface without having to use a pressure chamber. Now, like other polyurethane resin systems, this one cures from the thickest point and radiates out. So unlike an air drying material that would dry in the thinnest area, this is the exact opposite. The thickest mass is going to cure first and then radiate out. So once the whole part is that bright white color and whatever is left over in your mixing cup has cured completely, then that's a good indicator that you're ready to demold. So I always like to keep that mixing cup handy, and when that really thin layer left over in the mixing cup has cured, that's a good sign that I'm ready to demold that part. And there we have a nice bubble-free part. Now that baby powder has transferred to the resin, and what that does, that gives us a nice matte surface. And that's the function of that baby powder is twofold. It's basically helping bring in that resin. It has a capillary effect where it's actually drawing in the resin into some of those detailed areas. But then it also, once the baby powder transfers to the finished cast part, that gives you a nice paintable matte surface, as we'll see here in a minute. Now, if you don't have graduated mixing containers, or accurate ones for that matter, you can also use a 2-cup method where you take a couple of Dixie cups or similar size cups and pour out equal amounts of resin into each cup. Now, there's some things you got to be aware of if you're using this method, because one thing that you have to be very careful about is when you're transferring that into, say, a 3rd cup to mix it all up, sometimes the amount left behind, if you're working in really small batches, is enough to throw you off ratio. So a good idea here is to mix those together in each cup, as you'll see here in a minute. So I like to set those on the edge of my workbench, eyeball those really close, make sure they're exactly the same level or as close as possible. And now I'm ready to mix those up. Now, you'll notice what I do. Instead of pouring that into a 3rd cup, I'm going to pour the B into the A, scrape that out really good, and then the A into the B. And I can't remember if I'm citing that correctly or not, but you get the point. A into B, B into A, The result is the same, but you're basically mixing that up and then transferring it back to the original cup and mixing it again. And that way you incorporate all of that residue of both the A and the B components. Because if you don't do that, if you just dump those into a third cup and you don't scrape the sides really well, because they're different viscosities, the part B is a little thicker than the part A, sometimes you might be off ratio just a little bit. So when in doubt, make sure you scrape those containers really well and then transfer it from one to the other, mixing in both cups. And that way you get all of that resin mixture incorporated. And you'll see that good mixing here really only takes about 20 to 30 seconds tops. And you can easily mix thoroughly and accurately if you have good straight edge stir sticks and good clean mixing containers. Now, you'll probably also notice that we did not use mold release in this process. I just used baby powder, no mold release. And the reason for that is whatever mold release, if you decide to use mold release, you will need to clean that off the cast part. And if you're not careful cleaning it up, that can lead to major problems later on with paint adhesion. So make sure when in doubt, if you have a really critical part and you're using a silicone mold, it's best to use no mold release or very minimal mold release. But you'll find that baby powder trick really helps the paint stick a lot better. And sometimes even on clean resin pieces, you'll get a little bit of fisheye if you have a really slick part. And this baby powder transferring to the plastic part gives you a nice matte surface that's very easy to paint. And here I'm just applying a primer and then also some silver spray paint there on the right hand side. And you'll see that after about 15 to 20 minutes, that's bonded on very well. Now I'm not going to go scratch it too aggressively, but it's definitely stuck on really good. I came back and checked it another 20 minutes later and it was rock solid. This method is also really helpful anytime you're using new silicone molds that might be exuding a little bit of silicone oil. Some of the softer silicones sometimes will exude a little bit of oil on the surface, and doing that baby powder technique really helps absorb that and make sure that you get a nice matte paintable surface on your cast part. So there you have the basic techniques for making sure you get good paint adhesion to polyurethane resin. And of course, all of the urethane resin and silicone used in our videos you can find on our website at brickintheyard.com. And I'm going to put a link on the right-hand side to a previous video we posted a while back explaining some of the different casting resins and how they work. So be sure to check that out. That'll be on the right-hand side right there. And then on the left-hand side, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And of course, be sure to like the video. Make sure you let us know what you think of our content and click the bell icon so you're notified anytime we post new material. Thanks again for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe.